I'm Matt Miller.
And I'm Hannah Elliott, and this is Hot Pursuit.
Okay, we have a fun guest today on what has become a little bit of a touchy subject for
apparently
for you and me.
It's reared its ugly head yet again. We're bringing it into 2025, I guess.
Yes, we're going to talk to the head of the Corvette Museum in Bowling Green, Kentucky.
Robert Maxhimer.
You are the bigger Corvette fan. I mean, officially because you own Corvettes.
I mean, it's not a competition.
It's not a competition, but I feel a love. I've recently rekindled love for the Corvette, but it's happened to me a couple times in my life that I've gotten pretty close to it, and right now I'm there with the C8.
It's only a matter of time. I mean, I do think the Corvette is really under-loved and underappreciated, so I'm very happy to talk to Robert about Corvettes and pop culture and this new exhibit they've got. And I'm not surprised you are in love with it again. I think it's only a matter of time to get yours.
I also hope that we see more. You know, we've talked in the past. We talked to Tom Wagner, who owns a number of car businesses and racing businesses through Nighthead Capital. One of them is Revology, and they make the Mustangs. But they've considered an expansion, and I really hope they do a C2 Corvette.
Wait, did he tell us this, or is this new information?
He told us, I think, that they were considering other vehicles or projects.
You've since learned.
And I've heard from Tom at Revology also that they would be open to mulling the potential of, other things. And there are already some, like, Restomod or kit car makers, but there's nobody who makes it from the ground up the way Revology does from the Mustang, and you know that I get excited about that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm going to vote for a C3 version just because I'm going to be a broken record this entire podcast taking everything back to the C3, but I mean, why not a C3 Resto? Get the younger set, the 80s babies.
I do agree with you that it is way more punk rock.
Yeah, it's got an attitude problem, and I like it.
If Alison Mosshart had a Corvette, it would be a C3.
There you go.
Speaking of Alison Mosshart, we had listener email, and we encourage listeners to write in. Our email address is
hotpursuit@bloomberg.net.
Yeah, and we had a great listener email that you highlighted recently about somebody who did listen to the Alison Mosshart episode and appreciated her and her challenger and our challengers.
Yes, this was from Doug. We'll just say your first name. Doug, thanks so much for writing. I think we've heard from you a time or two before, and we love the photo that you sent of your daughters with a white Challenger, just like Allison's. Super cool. And yeah, I also liked your take on speccing out, a GT3 versus a 992. And, getting into, do we like digital? Do we like analog gauges, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Does anyone like digital gauges? No, right?
I think I wrote back and told Doug, I totally agree, except for when I was in that Cayenne GTS recently, it has the 5 digital gauges, and honestly, it didn't bother me. But that's an SUV.
Exactly.
So that's a little different.
It's a different thing, and you wouldn't buy, I don't imagine you would buy a Cayenne GTS and think this is a forever car for me.
Right.
I'm going to make a spot with a trickle charger in the garage where I keep this until I hand it over to my great-grandchildren. That's not the point. That's the kind of car you lease for 2 years and then give back.
Are you saying you don't have a poster of a Cayenne SUV on your wall?
I mean, you know what? Obviously, you see a lot of the older Cayennes on Bring a Trailer, and I have a buddy here who let me drive his Ferrari 355, and he has a Cayenne with a manual, which
How did they even make
awesome.
that? Is that an aftermarket thing?
No, they made them for a while.
What?
Yeah,
Ooh,
and
I had no idea. That seems really crazy.
Cool. So older Cayennes are a thing, and a brand new GTS. Do you buy that and say I'm going to hold it forever? No. Do you care if it doesn't have analog gauges? No. But on a 911. Yeah. I think for most people who purchase a Porsche 911, whatever generation, I would say probably the majority say, I'm going to keep this car forever, right? Is that fair?
Honestly, I disagree. I think half of them now are saying, I'm going to sell this car in 2 years and make money.
True. That's painful to think about. But you're right. I know a guy who actually offered to let me drive a couple of his Ferraris and has like an amazing garage and said he has an ST coming in February.
That is my favorite Porsche. I think it is.
He emailed me and I was like, wow, what an amazing offer.
Yes.
So I called him up and I talked to him for a while. Awesome dude, super genius, quant investor.
Wow.
Who isn't really that into P cars, but he said a few years back, a Porsche dealer gave him the opportunity to buy a GT3. And he was kind of interested and bought it, and he loved it because he really appreciates mechanical grip. But after a year of driving it occasionally, he sold it for a big profit. And then he realized he was just going to order one every year and do that. Just flip it.
A lot of people do that in LA.
Well, I don't think that's cool. I appreciate someone from middle America who's had a Porsche poster on the wall since she was 4, like saving up through her like middling career and then finally being able to afford one at 45 and then keeping it in her garage forever. You know what I'm saying?
I love that. That's somehow it seems more genuine. I was trying to think, why is that considered, why do you prefer that? And I think it's because to you it seems more of a genuine thing.
Yeah, there's a passion there. There's no passion with somebody who takes a car because he's super rich and can flip it and does so.
Yeah.
There is a passion with someone who, has always hoped to have a Porsche, has always been in love with, has dog-eared copies of Road and Track, and that person wants analog gauges, obviously, right?
That's true. I think a lot about Dua Lipa and Porsche.
I recently learned who Dua Lipa was.
Yeah.
So.
Well, she's an ambassador or a brand partner with Porsche, and
is she old enough to have a driver's license?
Yes.
Okay.
I think she's in her 30s.
Wow. She looks great for 30.
I know, she looks amazing. Yeah. That partnership is so fascinating to me. And I don't really know why. I think it's because I actually do like Dua Lipa's music. But she is a little unexpected for Porsche, but I also think she probably indicates where they are trying to get the brand to go.
Yeah, they want a younger audience. I actually was reading a stat on, so we're going to talk Corvettes, and I was looking through the generations, and I saw that at one point, I don't know if it was C4 to C5 or C5 to C6. But at one point, GM was like, all of our Corvette owners are super old. Like 80% were over 55, right? And if you looked at 911 owners, only 30% were over 55, which I was already surprised about because I feel like 911 also is kind of an old man car in some respects. But somebody made a comment in the story, like, you don't want to drive an old man's car, you want to drive a young man's car. And I guess that's probably true for the majority of people, right?
Yeah, I guess. I mean,
not for you and
tough.
me.
Yeah. No, I would like to drive an old man's car, actually, to be honest. It's obviously tough because it's a pre-selecting situation when a car is expensive, because typically who has the most money in the country? Older men. So it's kind of self-selecting.
It is weird, though, that Dua Lipa is their partner, because I would think she fronts a BMW XM campaign, or she is the new brand ambassador for Jaguar,
Ooh, that would be interesting. Can you imagine?
I mean, it's kind of...
I wonder how much she got paid. That's what I would like to know.
Or maybe she just loves cars, like sometimes there are unexpected... Sydney Sweeney, for example, is an absolute... gearhead car lover.
That's true, but she has a long history already established of being involved in cars or having a cool car or two. Doesn't she work on a truck or something? She has a truck or an SUV that she works on?
I mean, she also is only 23 years old, so it can't be that long of a history. But I'm impressed, and she has legit chops, as
for sure.
Someone who's passionate about cars.
Maybe Dua has that as well. It's just less publicized.
All right, let's get to Robert Maxhimer. Without further ado, he runs the Corvette Museum in Bowling Green, Kentucky. Robert, let's start with with the Corvette Museum, because
There's an exhibit.
It's
a new exhibit, right?
A new exhibit, but just the museum itself. First of all, it's in Bowling Green, Kentucky. So Hannah would have to drive for like 3 days to get there. It would take me probably 10 hours.
And I almost have. I have been to the museum.
Oh, you have?
Of course.
Awesome.
Now, do you believe that I love Corvettes?
I know you do.
I think she likes it.
I did go after the infamous sinkhole, and I do want to ask you,
yes.
for people who remember the sinkhole, we would like to let them know this is not an issue anymore, but you can sort of still see some of it.
So, I mean, the sinkhole obviously was a huge story, and everyone, still today, I mean, so yesterday we had, it was a pretty slow day, the weather was bad, so we had about 30 people total that came to the museum. 7 of them asked the front desk about the sinkhole.
Yes,
and
I'm not surprised.
It's always, they're always asking about where it is, can we go inside of it, can we see the cars? And it's like, no, that's all been fixed. The Sky Dome is now the safest place in Bowling Green, maybe in Kentucky. So, no, it's an interesting story, but we're here to celebrate Corvette, so it's nice to kind of move on from that a little bit.
I'm glad we could clear that up, just for anyone who was thinking about visiting and worried about the sinkhole. It's no longer an issue.
But the museum, tell us how the museum started. I mean, was Corvette production originally in Bowling Green? I know they make them there now, but why is the museum there?
So it started in Michigan. The first 500 Corvettes were made in Michigan in 1953. And then they moved to St. Louis, where they were there until the late 70s. And then they started the plant here in Bowling Green, which came online in 1982. They started making the C4 generation in 1983, but they made 40 of them and they were abysmal. So they don't make there's no 1983 Corvette in the world except here at the National Corvette Museum. There's one in existence. And then they started pumping them out there in 1984, and they still make them there today.
So what is the new exhibit? Tell us about the new exhibit.
So the new exhibit in the Sky Dome, which is completely safe, by the way, is pop culture and Corvette, where we're able to examine how Corvette's kind of made its way into the zeitgeist of culture, over many generations. From the first movie it was in, which was Kiss Me Deadly in 1955, all the way through to it was recently in the movie Red One. Which came out on Amazon Prime not too long ago. So in there's music. We have Jim Lovell's Corvette, who was mission commander for Apollo 8, Apollo 13. We have that on display along with some artifacts that he took into space, space gloves, and that kind of thing. So it really runs the gamut of pop culture, not just film and TV, but music and everything else. It's pretty cool.
Robert, can you take us a little bit even farther back than that and really talk to us about why the Corvette was developed? Like, obviously people know this is sort of America's answer to the beautiful European sports cars, but talk to us about, what Harley Earl envisioned when he first had the concept of creating an American sports car.
Yeah, that's so funny you asked me, because I was just speaking with Richard Prince, who's a photographer for Corvette Racing. We're doing an exhibit with him that opens March 7th. But he's here doing some interviews and some oral histories for us. And I just had that conversation with him. He wrote a book about it, actually. So Harley Earl, he had the idea by going to Watkins Glen and seeing a race there. He was actually in a Buick Motorama design car, and he was leading the first pace around the track, which back then wasn't a track; it was actually the streets of Watkins Glen, and he was blown away. There was 200,000 people on that track watching this race, and he just had no idea there was so much fanfare for motorsports. So he went back and he just basically tasked the entire GM group with creating this sports car. And of course, the influence of GIs coming back from Europe, seeing these cars that were over there, the two-seater sports cars, was influential as well. So that's really what sparked it. And then it just kind of grew from there when, especially when Zora got involved.
And the name Corvette comes from a naval term for a type of boat, right? A very light, quick attack boat. Am I getting
correct.
that right?
That's correct. Yes, it was a warship that was known for being fast and could get into tight spaces.
Is it fair to say it took GM a while to figure out what they had on their hands? Because for the first few generations, I hear, production was tough, manufacturing was difficult. You just referenced the 1983 problems that sort of eliminated the model for that year. And I also have read that, it wasn't very fast at first, and it took a while before the brass realized they got to get this thing racing. They got to get some wins. And obviously now it's another story. We see it at Le Mans. We see it on the podium all the time. But it took them a long time to realize that they had a hit.
Right. What was interesting is that they were trying to push it out for the next Motorama, and which was at the Waldorf Astoria, and so they made these cars just like on a whim. Nothing was really custom for it outside of the design of the body and the frame. The motor was the Blue Flame 6-cylinder that came out of the truck. That was in production, and the only options that you could get on the car to begin with was either with or without a heater, or with or without AM radio. Everything else was just, you got it the way it came, in the white with the red interior.
Only white. It only came in white.
Only in white in 1953. That's right. And then eventually they introduced black, and then more and more colors. But yeah, it was underperforming. People were not impressed with how it was on the streets or on the track. And it wasn't until Zora got involved, Zora Duntov, and he wrote a letter to the GM brass and said, "Hey, look, if we're going to compete with Porsche and Ferrari, we need to start developing these motors that are going to be able to achieve that." So he really pushed into the V8 eventually in 1957, and then it grew into the big block and racing. Zora's the whole reason why there's Corvette racing in the 50s and early 60s. So yeah, it's interesting. We have the letters here actually in our archives, those original Zora letters. So
can you tell us what else you guys have there, just to give people an idea? Like if we are planning a trip in the area, what other things can people expect to see at the museum?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think for years the expectation was to see a bunch of Corvettes, which is awesome. I mean, everybody wants to see a bunch of Corvettes, but luckily our collection, between our archives, our 3D collection, obviously our car collection, we can tell a ton of different stories. So you can expect to see documents, artwork, blueprints, original blueprints from the Opel project, which was the 53. All the way through to recent C8 related objects as well. So we have a few of the cars on display, but we're also in the process of scanning. So we've 3D scanned a few cars, specifically the XP819, which is the Ugly Duckling, and then the Z06 63 split window racer. Two one-of-a-kind cars that are only here in our collection are now digitally scanned, and people can go on their phones and actually explore these cars, on their own. So there's a lot that we're pushing out, and we're excited for the future for sure.
Are you guys actively acquiring additional vehicles for the museum and acquiring things for the archive as well?
Absolutely. We're donation based. So, people come to us, and if they have a Corvette that they're willing to donate to the museum, there's a form that's filled out. It goes through our collections committee where it's voted on, and then we, accept it as a recent acquisition. And that's for everything from a car to, it could be like recently we got these trophies that were handed out by GM to car clubs, Corvette clubs in the 60s during the C2 generation. So they're very one of a kind, but just somebody had them in their basement and didn't need them anymore and offered it to us. So we're always looking for things to kind of bridge the gap in our collection for sure.
I wanted to go through some of the generations because not everybody knows their, C1 through C8. It's pretty easy to get through them. And
thank God. Unlike some other automakers.
Exactly. I first became aware of a Corvette when I was watching Animal House. It's kind of like a bad guy car. And then in Less Than Zero, there's also a C1.
Great movie.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous car. But a lot of people who own them, as well as like other C2, say that it's kind of like driving a truck because they are body-on-frame cars, right?
Yeah, they are. No power steering in those early cars, so your steering wheel is about this big, and it's not built for comfort, and especially when you get into the C2s, which I think are gorgeous cars.
Yeah.
They weren't built for comfort, so you're going down the road, you're going to feel every bump for sure. It's not until you got into the C5s and into the C8s where you really start to see the difference in the suspension and the chassis. So, but yeah, everyone is different. Everybody likes a different one. So,
I mean, for me, the C2 is my favorite, and that's the one that a lot of resto mod or kit car makers, try and replicate. There are a couple things that I wonder about. The split rear window is so cool. But was it made like that way on purpose, or was it because they couldn't make a whole large pane of glass in the curved shape, or why was it split?
So yeah, the 63, which was the only year that was produced, that was one of the only cars that had total control over. The designer had total control over it, Larry Shinoda. They basically said, hey, do what you want. And everything from the lines down the side of the car to that split window were his touch. Unfortunately, when it came out, a lot of people found it distracting. They couldn't see it out the rear view mirror. So they actually sold kits to cut that out and replace it with a full window.
That's wild. That is wild.
Now, could you imagine? I mean, that's
because
insane.
now the collectible. I mean, it's like that's.
Oh, it's highly. Yes. It's
also, it's an intended design element because I thought it was because manufacturing the whole window would have been too difficult, or there was some reason that they had to do it like that.
It was purely design. Larry liked the look of it. It felt like it continued the curve down the back of the car and gave it a stronger look, was his theory. So.
The C2 obviously is beautiful and iconic, but personally I love the C3 because I feel like it's a step toward modern sensibilities. It's so ornery, and it can really go either. It can look very classy, the chrome bumper I love. It can look very classy, or it can just look really not. I don't want to say anything, but it can look unclassy.
Yeah.
But I love that too.
Right.
I just love how it's got an attitude, and it's so compelling. And you're so right. It doesn't drive great, but it's got a personality. The point is not to have the best handling or fastest car. I've got a 77 C3, so it's not even a manual; it's an automatic. So I bought it because I like how it looks, and it just has this attitude that I love so much. Yes, the C2s are really beautiful and classic, but for me, the C3 is a punk car, and I love that about it.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, totally. Especially the transition, you had the chrome bumper and
completely
and the early C3s and into that polyurethane bumper, which is a look, it's
a look. And I have to say, my husband has a chrome bumper that's a 4-speed manual, so I do have access to that. But I, of course, have the underloved non-chrome bumper automatic. And the first time I drove it, I actually did ding the nose because it's so much longer than you think when you're in the driver's seat.
You don't think you're driving it.
It can catch you out if you're not careful. So I don't know. It's got such a personality. I really love that.
Well, and here's the thing. Just we're talking about all this, and in Corvette, what really struck me about it when I was doing the research when I started was Every year they constantly push innovation. It's always what's next? What can we do to make this car better? Constantly. It's not, they don't sit back and just let it ride. It's and some
Well,
things work and
is
some
that
things don't.
true for the late 80s, 90s era? I mean, it did
Well,
kind of feel like they were coasting a little bit.
Well, a little bit. I mean, when you get into the C4, and especially towards that 96 when it
Uh-huh.
stopped, the C4 was a bridge into the technology era, I think. That's why there were so many issues with it because they were trying to put so much computerized,
They're trying
equipment
too
inside
hard.
of it. Yeah, yeah. And then into the C5, I mean, the C5 kind of saved Corvette because it was such a big seller and people felt comfortable in the car. So each one serves its purpose. Then you get into the C6 with the ZR1, and you're getting more into performance.
You're back on
And then
track
obviously,
slightly.
yeah, exactly. And then the C7 for a lot of people is the pinnacle of the Corvette. I mean, it's just it has that same line, the same silhouette as a
Engine
classic
still in the
Corvette.
front.
I'm
Engines in
gonna
front.
totally disagree. I love the C8. I thought it was so much car for the money when I first drove it in late 2019.
Well, but it's a massive
early 2020.
departure, right? I get
Completely.
Yeah.
It looks like a Ferrari.
So I mean, the C7 I think looked like a Ferrari at the time too. That's when I saw that unveiled. It was the first. It was one of the things that I thought, not in a bad way, because I fell in love with the car right away. But I thought that's the end of the traditional Corvette era.
I agree with
because the
that,
motor's
sure.
in the front, right where it should be on a Corvette, and the C8. Although I'm head over heels in love, and I can't wait to as soon as it's financially possible get my own.
Right.
It's a different kind of thing.
It's different.
Yeah, and
I agree.
Do a lot of people see that break just because of the engine placement?
There's people that complain about it. There's traditionalists out there that will never sell their C7, but we have the museum delivery program here at the museum, and it's just, it's they're only C8s, they're brand new cars, and it's 8 cars a day. So there's people not only buying these, but they're seeing that the younger generation's getting more attracted to the car more than any other generation of Corvette. So. I think that was their objective, was to say, hey, we need to shake things up and get these other people interested in this younger generation. By the way, we're not competing with Ford. We're not competing with the Mustang. We're competing with Porsche and Lamborghini and Ferrari and Aston Martin. That's our benchmark. So I think that's what the CA did. And you mentioned before, it's not a supercar. Well, then you've got the ZR1 that came out, 1,064 horsepower.
I
And
mean, I think it is a supercar. Even before you get to the ZR1. In my opinion, Hannah and I have talked about this a lot. We don't have to rehash it, but it's.
Oh, we can. We can.
I mean, where else are you going to find something like the Z06, right?
Well, yeah.
Flat plane crank, and it's naturally aspirated, but still makes 650 horsepower, and I mean, it just, in my opinion, just ticks all the boxes. Now, what I can't remember. Why did you say it's not a supercar, Hannah? Just because it doesn't cost?
It's not a supercar because a supercar is a superlative vehicle that combines the best of every element and was always intended to be the top. The Corvette was not conceived as a superlative vehicle. We've just gone over how it actually wasn't at all. And P.S., the Corvette has the nickname America's sports car. Like, how much more evidence do you need? Yes, we have higher powered variants of the Corvette, of course, but it was not conceived as a superlative performance vehicle that would cost more and do more than any other vehicle in the lineup.
So, Robert, what do you think? I mean, is a C8, is a Z06 a supercar?
That's a good point. I mean, you think of like the Ford GT, that
was conceived
supercar?
as the superlative.
Yeah, I would say that's a supercar.
Yes, agree.
The
Corvette is not. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead. I get real worked up.
No worries. No, I get your point. But the fact that you can have within the same car, multiple entry points. You can get into a Stingray for 60,000 in a base model, or like we were talking about the ZR1, which is going to cost who knows how much that's going to be, which I would argue is a supercar. So, but I get your point of it not being conceived and delivered as specifically a supercar from the beginning. I think once you drive it, you would call it a supercar, but
I mean, if a Z06 is better than a Ferrari 458, is it just a sports car that happens to be better than a supercar?
Good point. Good point.
I don't know. Who's saying it's better than a 458?
I'm saying if. You can drive them back to back and draw your own conclusions, but a lot of people would say it is.
Are you saying that, though?
No, I haven't driven a 458, so I'm just telling you what other people have with more experience, like Eddie Alterman would say, it is at least as good as, if not better, and he has a heck of a lot of experience driving cars.
It could be competitive with the 458 on the track consistently. Should it be in the same conversation as the supercar?
I might argue that a 458 is also not a supercar.
I knew you were going to say that.
How's that?
I knew that was coming.
Some Ferraris are supercars, but I wouldn't, and I don't want to awaken the Ferrari beast, but I might argue that a 458 isn't a supercar. It's a high-end sports car, and that's wonderful.
So really the difference is consumer car, a car that's made for consumers specifically,
sure.
A mass consumer.
Yes.
Versus like the C5R, C6R, C7R, C8R, those race cars.
Sure.
Those are made specifically for racing.
Yeah, that's part of it.
Let's talk about racing, Robert, because there's so much made about Ford versus Ferrari, and I get that the GT40 or that those special cars are supercars and are very special like a Ferrari, but Corvette has real racing pedigree in multiple generations, right? And they sometimes achieve 1, 2, 3 finishes at Le Mans. So what do you think are the proudest moments in Corvette racing?
I think going back to the Gulf Oil series and the early 60s, with the C1 and then into the C2, they were highly competitive. And, you have Bill Cunningham, Don Yanko, and all these like really famous race car drivers that drove these cars and just kicked butt time after time. And then GM pulled out of that, right? They said, this isn't for us. And then you get into the early 70s and then the late 80s with the Challenge series, which is also a really fascinating era of motorsports for Corvette. And then the introduction of the ZR1 in 1990. And again, just consistently kicking everybody's butt all the way down the line. And then getting into 1999 with the C5R. And it just keeps going the same direction. They have to make new divisions for them because they're too competitive or they're too good, and it just it's a fascinating story. I specifically like the later generation, the C5R to C8R, that Corvette racing, the factory back Corvette racing. That story is just fascinating because it was a family. You had Doug Feehan, who oversaw as for the entire group. And then these drivers that kept coming back, Andy Pilgrim, Dale Earnhardt Jr. raced, at Daytona at one point, and then Oliver Gavin, and all these great race car drivers that won these amazing races and beat Ferrari and Lamborghini and Aston Martin. So it's a great story, and that's something that we're definitely working on for an exhibition, a larger scale exhibition here at the museum, because the personalities involved are just outrageous and so much fun, and it's going to be great.
I think some of the most eccentric, wildest people I've met have been in car circles, kind of like what you're describing. I mean, there's so many stories, especially in the history of American sports car racing. It's just, you're so right. I can't wait to see how you guys tell that story because there's so many wild characters.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, right next door we have Andy Pilgrim's doing an oral history for us. he drove at Le Mans with Dale Earnhardt. And I remember talking to him being like, Dale Earnhardt, he's a guttural, visceral driver. He's just going off his instinct. Andy Pilgrim is highly intelligent. He was a computer software engineer, so he's looking at it two different ways. So yeah, there's a lot of different personalities that we can explore for sure.
Robert, how closely does the museum work with the actual automaker? Are you guys in close contact? You mentioned a delivery program that you guys have. How much back and forth is there?
Yeah, there's a lot. We have members of our board that are part of GM from the plant as well as up in Michigan. We work with them constantly. They're very supportive of the museum, and from our perspective, it gives us something to shoot for as far as the way that they operate. So we want to try to keep in line with the brand, which is unlike any other car made here in America. So if we can have that as people walk into the museum and that's what they expect, then we're doing a good job. But yeah, they're a great partner for us.
Okay, so my next question, of course, is we need some gossip. What can you tell us about the Corvette Zora? Is this happening? Maybe a Corvette SUV. Who knows? The rumor mill is rife with this type of thing. Yes. What can you tell us?
Yeah. Well, we definitely hear all the rumors for sure. I feel like we're a meeting place for that.
I bet.
Like I said, we're partners with GM. We work with them a lot. But we're not in Studio X designing the C10 Corvette, so it's a bit of as much of a surprise for us as everybody else. When these cars come out, like I said, they're always pushing the envelope. So I'm sure whatever's coming next is going to be even better than what was before. So
they have to have an SUV coming soon, right? I mean, is that officially announced?
I don't think there's nothing official, and there's going back to the whole, thought of the front engine versus mid-engine, this is America's sports car, which is a two-seater car. And suddenly you get into SUVs and things like that.
But it could be its own standalone brand easily, right? If Mustang can be a pony car,
but are we happy about that? Are we happy about the Mustang SUV?
I am not terribly, but I know that it's a good business idea to break out such a successful model into a brand, right? I keep waiting for Corvette to do that, and it seems like it's inevitable.
Yeah, your guess is as good as mine. I'll say that.
Really? I don't think my guess is quite as good as yours. Right? Mark Royce never comes over to my house, and I'll bet he's down there a lot.
Yeah.
I think I've read that it could be the SUV built on the same platform as the CT5, the Cadillac platform, which would be cool because you could have a manual transmission. Doesn't it kind of break your heart that the C8 isn't offered in any way in a manual transmission?
It is a little bit. I mean, we have the last manual Corvette in the Skydome, and it is a little heartbreaking. I'm personally a big fan of
what is the last manual? What is the last manual Corvette?
It was a Stingray, C7 Stingray, so 2019, and rolled off the line and came right over here. But yeah, I know paddle shifting is a thing for some people, but there's something about just having that control over the clutch and the stick that makes you feel like you're part of the car. I don't know. You're in control.
Well, let me ask you this. I won't put you on the spot, Robert, because I can tell you're a very diplomatic and smart gentleman. But from the people who, not you, but the people who do come to the museum, what is the feeling about a hybrid or even an electric Corvette? Obviously, we know we're already in hybrid territory.
Love the E-Ray.
What are you hearing about opinions about whether a Corvette is real if it's a hybrid or an electric?
That's a great question. I think that the E-Ray specifically really threw a lot of people for a loop. They didn't understand what it was. We had last April at our bash, which is a big, convention of Corvette owners. Taj, Jupiter came out, and we had Harlan Charles, and we had Tom Peters, all these great Corvette people. But Taj got up, and again, somebody who's extremely intelligent, was able to explain, hey, the E-Ray, the front motor, the electric motor, the battery, all that stuff, it's not meant to be a hybrid. You're not getting better gas mileage. It's there for propulsion. It's there to help the performance of the car. So, to view it as a hybrid in the traditional sense of the term, it's not completely accurate. Now, when you're sitting in it doing a launch, you can see why they did it. I mean, you're going 0 to 60 in like whatever it is. It's insane. Your eyes go at the back of your skull.
So much grip. It's all-wheel drive. It's the first all-wheel drive Corvette, right?
Yeah. It's a little bit more kind of utilitarian, that you can drive it in the snow, and you can get those special snow tires on it. I haven't done that, but that's what they say.
That'd be fun. That'd be really fun.
It would be kind of fun. So yeah, I think it's just about, and people ask, where do you plug it in? And of course you don't plug it anywhere. So it's just about education, and I think once they understand, oh, I get it, this is a high performance car. Really enjoy it. So
I think that totally makes sense. And, Matt and I talk about this with a lot of luxury and sports cars, that really the hybrid element, like you say, is not about quote unquote going green or saving gasoline. It's actually about performance. And it does noticeably enhance performance. So what's to argue with, in a way?
Yeah, it's so, the acceleration is mind-blowing, and in a much more visceral way than an all-electric car, which may put even better numbers down, but you just don't feel it the same way as you do with the 6.2-liter V8 behind you.
Right, exactly.
I just think it's such a cool offering. So you have right now at the C8, you have the Stingray, you have the Z06, you have the E-Ray, and you have the ZL1, right?
ZR1, yep.
ZR1, sorry. And then Zora's next. Is that right?
I have no idea.
Good. That was a really good try. That was a really good try, Matt.
Robert, do you have a favorite? Do you have a favorite generation or a favorite edition?
That's a great question. I love the look of the C2. I think, of the cars that we have on display now, and this changes every day, so ask me tomorrow and it'll be different, but we have an L88 69 black on black convertible that is just beautiful. And that, if I had any car, I think that would be it. And especially an L88, it's such a powerful car, and a lot of history with it. But yeah, you get into the big blocks, the C2 and the 67, and it's those are great cars. And then the ZR1, the 90 ZR1 is also kind of nostalgic. For me, I'm a 80s kid, so I remember seeing those. My uncle had one.
That's
like,
cool.
oh, that's the coolest car ever. So yeah, again, it changes every day. So
can you pick a car from the museum and take them home on the weekends, or?
Yeah. We have a fleet. So we have an education kind of fleet of cars, a C3 through a C8. And then we use those for trips. We go on, education outreach. We go to schools and that kind of thing. The collections cars, no, those are highly protected by our collections team and cared for. So they are all in working order. That's our objective. We want them to be alive and not sitting there rotting. So they're maintained on a regular schedule and driven periodically just to keep things moving.
You know what's really weird? And I just remembered this. And Robert, you reminded me when you said like everyone's uncle had a Corvette. I had the pink Barbie Corvette when I was growing up.
Cool.
And that might have and I don't think about it, but that might have had a real subconscious influence on me because I ended up owning a Corvette. And you're kind of right. They just kind of pervade culture in a way. Especially, I was born in the 80s too. That is so funny. I just thought of that. But
As a humble brag. that she's born in the 80s.
Is it?
for somebody in my generation.
But I love that Corvette.
The pop culture thing, it's like
Totally.
I came from Disney, and I was at Disney Archives for almost 10 years. And you look at a brand like that who has also entered the culture,
Yes.
American culture. There's a few brands that have done it, but Corvette's definitely one of them. I think that's something you grow up with.
Do you think he agreed with you or me about the supercar thing?
It felt like he didn't really have a strong opinion one way or the other. And I should have asked if he'd been a Corvette fan from birth, or if this was
or if
more.
he owns one.
We should have asked that too. But I think, so he used to work for Disney, and then he ran like the San Diego Historical Society or something. So it's like, his job isn't as an automotive engineer.
It's archives.
And he's not necessarily a fanboy. It's about the archives and the museum stuff.
Which is cool, actually.
No, totally awesome. And I'm psyched for the Corvette Museum that they got him. I think he was a big get for them. Mm-hmm. But it didn't seem like he had a passionate opinion on the supercar argument, which obviously you and I both have strong takes on that.
We are not letting go.
I don't want to touch it again.
I am clenching. I'm definitely. No.
I will die on this hill, Hannah.
Look, this will be my final comment for today. Yeah. Well, at least for the next 5 minutes. Just because something performs like a supercar doesn't make it a supercar.
Man, I think if it performs like a supercar and if it looks like a supercar, it has to be a supercar.
Maybe people should write in and let us know what they think. Obviously, we've brought this up before, but
yes,
seems to be an ongoing debate.
The email address is hotpursuit@bloomberg.net.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing is, I think there's a real split from Corvette, or a couple, right? The first, as far as I understand, at least the first two, possibly the first three generations were body on frame. Then it seemed like they didn't get super serious about it.
They did
C4,
not.
C5, kind of C6, but really C7 was when they were like, you know what? We're investing a lot of money to make this a really serious car.
Of course.
Overcoming manufacturing and quality issues.
And that's a pretty recent development in the history of the car.
Right.
Like, that's kind of where I'm like, yes, they made some that are very fast supercar-like performers, but like in the history of that model line, that's pretty recent.
Yeah, and well, I mean, he mentions Tad Yuchter, who I think really, along with Mary Barra and Mark Royce, they decided this is going to be, really going to put our money where our mouths are.
Yeah, which I love.
Yeah.
I mean, I totally respect that. And I do think the Corvette in general is criminally under-respected. Like, nobody respects the Vette. And every time I drive mine, I'm like, why aren't more people looking at me, honking at me, giving me thumbs up? I'm like, what do I have to do to get attention around here?
I mean, how do they not?
Such a cool car.
To be honest.
They don't. They really don't. It's weird. I told someone that, and he's like, well, you need to take the T-tops off more, and like, you need to get your hair out. And, like, it's such a good, fun, like, icon of American auto manufacturing, and I feel like it is not respected.
I feel like, though, adding that, I mean, I don't want to overstep any HR lines, but like Atomic Blonde with bright red lipstick, driving the Corvette.
Like, what do I have to do here?
I feel that is definitely at least a thumbs up.
I get nothing. I'm telling you, I get more in that old, huge Rolls-Royce cruising at 15 miles an hour than I do in the Corvette. It's weird.
By the way, do you think, you must think that it's the C3 is going to jump in value, right? They must.
Honestly,
I'm sure they made a lot.
They made so many of them, though.
Yeah, but it's been a while.
I'm telling you from experience, you can go out to the Pomona Swap Meet and pick one up for $15,000. You can go to Corvette Mike's and pick one up for $20,000. They're kind of, at least I do believe LA is a bubble, but they're kind of everywhere. They're so prominent, and most of them were not really cared for. So many of them are ropey and rough. That I honestly, I wish they would jump in value, but unless you have one that is really, truly in mint condition, chrome bumper, early in the generation, I don't necessarily think it's going to.
But if you have a cherry C3 with a 427 and a stick.
Manual, of course, it has to be. Like mine, I don't think it's going to gain much, but I drive it because I love it.
That's the right way to do it.
Yeah.
Well, I absolutely, I love the story, and
me too.
Starting with C6 was the first one that I drove, really,
cool.
And I thought it was brutal and so much fun, and you could easily kick out the rear end, but maybe a little dangerous.
Yeah.
For my experience at the time, it definitely was. Then I went through the whole C7 covering GM very closely and interviewing Mary Barra a lot. And,
cool.
It was a baby for her and for Mark. And so I felt really connected to that car, and I drove it on the track a lot. And I thought it was so cool, but still totally a Corvette. And then when C8 came out, I thought at the time, like, that's not cool. As maybe a bit of a purist, I thought that's not okay to put the engine in the back. And
yeah.
But now that I've driven it, I am won over surely, and it's definitely on a very short list of cars that I want to buy personally in the next couple of years. It's on there, like next to the CT5 Blackwing.
I think the C8 might be the center of our Venn diagram in terms of the cars that we each would personally own. Because there are lots of cars that you want to own that I don't need, and vice versa. But the C8 seems like for both of us falls in the middle. And I totally agree. I would 100% buy that car for myself if I had the money, which I don't. But, I totally agree. It's so much car for the money, and it's really fun. And it's has
so
such
sexy.
A heritage. Yeah.
I feel like I'm a drug runner, from the 1980s when I'm driving the convertible at night, and the interior just fits like a glove.
I know, it's cool.
And I don't know, it's the only problem I have with it is that there's no 3-pedal version, and that kind of bothers me because, like I say, the CT5V Blackwing is also on that very short list because it checks every box except for the sexy. It's like a terribly unattractive vehicle, but it has a supercharged V8, a stick shift, and it handles like it's on rails. Like, I just wish they would marry those two things and give me a 3-pedal Corvette. Not going to happen, I know.
Oh well.
I got a list from one of my buddies who runs a press fleet management company. He gave me a list of potential cars to drive in the next few months, and a plain Jane Stingray was on there, which I've never driven because I've been in the Z06 and the E-Ray, but I've never driven just the base Stingray, and I really want to drive it because I want to spend as little money as possible and get as much as I can, like everybody else. So I think that could be the answer, and I'm excited. There's also
I can't wait to hear
some other cool trucks that I got on that list. There's the Ram, in their new sort of no more V8s. They have the Hurricane Inline 6 in their what would be a TRX. I'm going to drive that one. I'm pretty excited about that. What about you? What do you got?
Well, I think I mentioned I'm getting a Vanquish.
Yes.
Next week, and some more Mercedes. I'm going to be driving. I don't think I told you the Escalade IQ. The electric
sweet
Escalade in February in LA. So, and the Optic. So I'm very excited and curious about those. I'm an Escalade fan.
It's going to be amazing.
I hope so. It's going to weigh so much. I'm scared about the weight.
I like that.
I mean, I saw at last year, we saw like an early prototype. I didn't drive it, but I saw it here in LA, and it looks very cool, very Escalade, very Cadillac, but it's so big. I'm a little worried about the weight, but I can't wait to find out for myself. So those are the things, the car-wise. I just got off the phone this morning with Rolls-Royce. They were announcing their numbers. Did you talk with Chris Brownridge today
I
on TV?
will have spoken with him by the time this podcast comes out.
So that's not embargoed, right? We can talk about Rolls-Royce?
Yes.
Right?
He's coming on, so we're recording this on Tuesday. He's coming on my TV show on Wednesday, and then we're putting this out on Friday. So
you want to talk about Rolls-Royce numbers?
Yeah, sure. I mean, go.
It seemed like, I literally just got off the call. It seemed like the top note is They were down slightly. This is their third highest year on record for sales. They delivered 5,700 cars globally. They don't seem that concerned. I mean, they're spinning it like their margins are increasing. They had a 10% increase in bespoke cars last year. So while their volume is down slightly, the profits on their cars is probably up. And then they've said that they're going to spend $370 million on expanding Goodwood, mostly so that they can have more space to build these really expensive bespoke commissions. So again, they're not going to expand their volume, but they're investing more in creating space to make these like multi-million-dollar cars.
And that's the direction. Really that's clearly the direction that the luxury vehicle manufacturers are all going, right? None of them are hitting sort of record deliveries except for Lambo. And they're all trying to do a lot more personalization, a lot more paint to sample, a lot more, like beyond paint to sample, right?
Beyond paint to sample, it would be like creating some sort of silk painted headliner that is a portrait of somebody's dog, like in the top of the car,
so
or like a cigar, a humidor, and made out of wood from your property in France that you've cut down and sent to the factory so that they can use your elm trees in your own person. I mean, it's That's like sweet. Really crazy stuff. The other thing that was really surprising to me is I went into the call really wanting to ask about Spectre, which is their
That's
two-door
also the first thing
electric.
on my mind.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Because I drove it in Cape Town. It was awesome. We kind of haven't heard a lot about it. And obviously, as we know, EVs are in a roller coaster right now. They wouldn't tell me how many Spectres they delivered last year, but they did say that it was the second most delivered vehicle from Rolls-Royce behind Cullinan.
Oh, Cullinan's the top?
Cullinan was
I would have thought Ghost is the number one.
No, it went Cullinan, Spectre, Ghost, Phantom. Isn't that wild?
That's crazy. I never see Cullinans.
I know. I was very surprised.
Somebody here at 731 Lex has a Cullinan. Not at Bloomberg. Not at Bloomberg.
Oh, okay.
Somebody who lives
in the building,
in like the penthouse, I'm sure.
Beyonce used to live in the penthouse,
right? And a bunch of Yankees, like Johnny Damon, have had places here. Peter Thiel had an apartment here. Like very wealthy people.
I used to really like Johnny Damon. He was like my favorite player.
There are people who could have one, but still, I only see one here in the courtyard and one in the garage across the street. I just don't see them very often. But to be fair, in New York, you don't really see Rolls-Royces that often. I'm sure.
Do you think that's because of image? Like you just feel like a bit of a
I don't
jerk.
Think so. I think it's New York, so not as many people are driving status symbols as LA or London. B, you're guaranteed to get bumped, keyed.
Yes, for sure.
Fender benders are highly likely. And the New England weather isn't great for, rust. And I'm sure that a lot of New Yorkers have Rolls Royces and keep them in Palm Beach,
That would make sense.
But they just aren't for the city. In the city, you just get, if you have a driver, right, you just get like a Yukon or an Escalade.
Fantasy. That's my New York fantasy.
All right, cool. Well, that's all we got for this week, but we look forward to we look forward to you hearing us.
We look forward to you hearing us next week.
Yeah. Someday.
It feels like a conversation between us and the listeners.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. So I guess that's it. I'm Matt Miller.
I'm Hannah Elliott, and this is Bloomberg.